start the recording. Okay. Oh, I guess we're not in practice. We are. Somebody wrote us a note saying that we're chatting. Yeah, not in the practice. So here we go. We're going to start the presentation, and I'll introduce myself. I'm Peter Hager, the district manager of Clinton County Soil and Water Conservation District. And I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Carlson, who's the chief research scientist at the NYS Forest Health, to introduce the other folks and to talk about, tell you what we're going to do today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Peter. This is great. As probably all of you know online, we've got serious or an interesting problem with gypsy moth, and Rob Cole will tell us all about that. Maybe some of you saw him on video last week already giving a public presentation on it. So I just wanted to reiterate, because there's been some discussion about what the state is and isn't doing, what we do in DEC Forest Health. It's our responsibility to monitor the health of the forest, and we spend a lot of time and effort. We annually survey the entire state. We do aerial surveys. We do at least a half of the state by air visually every year. And so every 2 years, we cover the entire state. And of course, when we get directed to specific forest health issues like the gypsy moth, we travel to those areas. Like one of our foresters, Gary Copeland, who's going to be speaking tonight, has had gypsy moth issues for the last couple of years, and he's directed us to where he'd prefer that we collect our aerial information. And then in the summertime, our staff load goes way up as we send ground crews out to those specific locations where there has been damage and confirm what the agent was. So we have on staff entomologists and pathologists and foresters and forest science officers and arborists, all interpreting the damage and where it is and trying to provide information to those who may be impacted by the continued activity. Now, having said all that, and Rob will tell you a lot about gypsy moth, it's been here for a long time. And back the last major outbreak we had, which was not really a killer outbreak, but it was significant in New York in 2004, 5, and 6 in various locations around the state. And the worst situation was about 500,000 acres statewide. After that collapse, we annually record about 50 to 100,000 acres of defoliated forest from things like the forest tent caterpillar and others. So I just wanted to say, you know, we're on top of this. We do egg mass surveys. We follow these pests and we collect information, but it costs a lot of money to spray treat, as Jeff Duflo will tell us later about what it takes to actually do an aerial application. And so those things are not taken lightly by us or by Jeff or by any of the operating foresters. So first, I want to introduce Rob Cole, who's a forester and an arborist, and he's been working on forest health issues since 2006. So he knows a lot about what is happening to the forest around the state of New York. So Rob, take it away.
All right. Just wait for my presentation here. I am the host now. All right, good evening, everybody. I'm Rob Cole. As Jerry said, I'm a forester in the Forest Health Unit, as well as a certified arborist. So tonight, I'm just going to give a little bit of background on what we're seeing around the state, some of the background information on gypsy moth, just to open it up for some of the more detailed gypsy moth discussions that I think Gary and Jeff are going to bring, and Christy. So we are talking about the European gypsy moth. I think everybody is probably familiar with what it looks like, since many of you are probably experiencing it right now. The picture on the right of the screen with the characteristic blue pairs and red pairs, dots on the back of the gypsy moth larva there, that's one of the later stages. So I just put this picture on the left here. when it doesn't quite look like, you know, the pictures we all see in the media or whatever. When it's really small, we're, you know, quarter inch, half inch, even up to an inch. They can be dark like this without those characteristic blue and red dots on the back. We got a lot of reports from Clinton County of these things sailing through the air on their silk, moving around a lot and getting in people's hair. This is how they were getting in the house. Just really high numbers of these things going on. So those are the caterpillars. They do the feeding damage, of course. And then here you can see we have a couple pictures here with egg masses on them. The picture on the right, you can see the adults there. The adults are really, you know, they're can have some brown markings on them. Really, those caterpillars are what are really eye-catching and the easiest thing to identify. And you can see the egg masses there that the adults are on. Fresh egg masses have a fuzzy texture, like you can see in the picture, and they'll be a light brown or a tan color, maybe inch and a half long, about 3/4 of an inch wide. The picture on the left there, you can see it's lost a lot of that fuzzy texture to the outside. It's more worn, it's lighter in color. This is an older egg mass. And you can see all those black holes in there. This is an egg mass that the gypsy moth have already emerged from. And you can see down near the bottom and on the right-hand side some areas where the actual eggs were. So the egg masses you'll see coming up late August and into September. And those older ones, obviously, you would see in the spring. So here's the life cycle. And what we're experiencing right now is down near about 5 o'clock here on this chart. We are in the later caterpillar stages at this point, but this is when the defoliation occurs, when the caterpillars are out, usually starting sometime in May. The defoliation becomes noticeable late May, early June, and then it hits its peak the last week of June or so. Once those caterpillars reach their largest larval stages, they're eating a lot of leaf material, you know, a square foot or more a day. At that point, that's when they're 2 inches, 2.5 inches long, the big fat juicy caterpillars. So I think we're moving into those stages now. We're seeing some of the bigger caterpillars out there. And soon, within the next couple weeks, we should expect to see them start to pupate. And that'll go on for the month of July. And then into August is when we'll start seeing the adults emerge and the adult moth out there. And then come September is really when the egg masses start becoming obvious, once all the leaves are off the trees and off all the understory in the forest. And most of them have been laid at that point. This is when you can really see those egg masses that I showed you the picture of. So, like I said, the outbreak that we're in right now, couple of weeks left with the heavy defoliation before the caterpillars should be pupating. And one thing when you look at this is it just looks like an endless cycle that continues over and over and over again. But with some natural predators out there, we'll see that this cycle does actually really calm down, and we don't see it going on all the time with the mass amount of caterpillars and defoliation. So the outbreak that we're seeing now probably going to last a couple of years. That's typical, 2 to 3 years for an outbreak. So at this point, we know obviously that it's in Clinton County. That's why we're having this meeting tonight. But just looking around where it came from, where it's headed, you can see New York has had gypsy moth for a very long time. It was actually introduced to the United States in the mid-1800s, looking to use it for silk production to increase the silk industry here in the US. it escaped. It escaped from where it was, moved out through Massachusetts and New York, and headed kind of south and west. And so you can see there actually is an invasion front, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, down through Ohio and Virginia. And eventually it was found to the north up in Maine, and it is found in Canada as well. So, you know, here in New York, it's become naturalized. That's how we end up with that cycle. These outbreaks only coming around every 10 or 15 years or so. As Jerry mentioned, we haven't seen a really large scale outbreak in actually about 15 years. I'll point out that outbreak in a second. Again, cyclical. It only lasts for 2 or 3 years, and we only have these outbreak levels once every 10, 15 years or even more. So in 2020, we started getting some reports of gypsy moth from around the state, some areas worse than others. So the Finger Lakes area, Canandaigua Lake, especially to the west of there. This is Gary's territory, so he'll have more to tell you about that. But we really saw the outbreak start in a pretty intense way out there. We had about 45,000 acres of really severe defoliation go on there last year. When we did our aerial survey along the PA border, we didn't find much going on. That area was pretty healthy. A little further east on the PA border, there was some scattered defoliation found. And then we had some concerns in Oneida and Oswego counties with some more homeowner calls, but still nothing crazy, just pockets. Same with Lake George area last year, just some pockets of moderate to heavy defoliation, but nothing really too exciting going on. Then comes this year, and we end up with severe defoliation going on, basically in these 3 major areas across the state. The first being what you're well aware of is the Eastern Adirondacks, from Clinton County all the way south to Schenectady County, basically, you know, the Northway corridor, heading up along Lake George and Lake Champlain, getting very heavily hit. As you know, we're getting a lot of reports, especially some of the smaller hamlets along Lake George and several of the towns up in Clinton County. Our area of concern in Oneida and Oswego County really spread out, and really you could say that the Mohawk Valley in its entirety probably is experiencing very significant defoliation right now as well. And then, of course, out there in that Finger Lakes area, that area of severe defoliation has expanded quite a bit this year. So the base layer on this map that you're seeing is basal area of oak, and the darker the green, the more oak there is. So oak is generally the preferred host. It's what the gypsy moth goes after first. However, this year we are getting reports of gypsy moth on a lot of different species. So you can see there oak, maple, apple, hickory, birch, willow, basswood, beech, and aspen have all been very common in the reports. Maple and apple have been really the 2 big ones coming out of Clinton County. Hearing about sugar bushes and the maple farms really having to either treat or think about treatment, and then a lot of homeowners with apples. Once those things have been defoliated, we're hearing about a lot of white pine defoliation, especially Warren County, Essex County, and Saratoga County, and spruce has been a big one, as well as the hemlock. And then if there's enough caterpillars or they've eaten everything else, some of the folks that I've talked to say they're basically eating everything in their landscaping that they can get a hold of. You know, The rose bushes are going, just everything. So we're seeing them in high numbers, and that's forcing them out onto some of these secondary hosts. So this is what folks are seeing. This is what we're hearing across the state in those areas. Complete defoliation of the oaks around their homes. What used to be, a little privacy area in between these houses is now completely leafless. And even on homes and on sheds and all sorts of building, people are seeing the caterpillars all over the place. That's what you can see on this picture here. All those little dark spots are, hundreds, and people are reporting, thousands, and they're out spraying them off, every day, trying to get them off their house, keep them from coming in the house, spraying them off the deck. So it is pretty bad out there. And then you can see this picture on the bottom left here. This is early on in the defoliation. You can see all the what appears to be brown trees. That's from the feeding of the leaves and exposing a lot more of the tree. So you can see how widespread it is there. And then these are some pictures that a homeowner was nice enough to share with us that they took, and you can see their property. And this is pretty consistent of what's going on up in Clinton County, and in a lot of these areas that we're looking at is really some pretty extreme defoliation. You can see in the top picture there are some what appear to be white pines that haven't been defoliated yet, but if you look closely in there, there are white pines that have been defoliated already. With the defoliation, there's with your broadleaf trees, the deciduous trees, oaks, and the like, you can expect to, generally we expect those trees to refoliate if they were in good condition. Somewhat healthy, solid trees, there's a really good chance that they'll refoliate over the next month or so, and by the end of July, they'll have a new set of leaves on them. Unfortunately, with the pines and the spruce, they do not do well with the defoliation. They don't have the ability, the same ability to put out needles as quickly as the broadleaf trees do have the ability to put out their leaves. So, any 100% defoliation is likely to cause mortality this season, as opposed to the hardwoods that can get some moderate defoliation or even heavy defoliation for a year or two and still survive. In that case, you may see some branch dieback and maybe a little bit of die off. But again, we really do expect healthy trees can probably take a year or two of the moderate defoliation. So there are a few things going on out there that I just want to touch on quickly. And that is there are some of these natural enemies out there and already at work. And the first one is the virus that we talk about, MPV here. You can see all these dead caterpillars on the tree, folded over in an upside down V. That's a sign that it is the virus. That's typically how they die. So we are seeing this out on the landscape now. We're getting reports of it from homeowners. We're getting these pictures, and some of our foresters are seeing this around. So this is a really good sign. This is nature doing what nature does, and it's working on reducing the population. But you can see that upside down V again is indicative of the virus. And when they've been killed by the virus, they kind of turn into this mushy, gooey, liquidy mess. So that's the virus. The other thing we have is the entomophaga fungus. And what this does is the fungus gets in the caterpillar and feeds on it and kills it that way. And so you'll see they get really thin and skinny and all emaciated. And when they die hanging on the tree, they die with their head pointed downwards. So you'll see them hanging like this if they've been killed by the fungus. We haven't seen a lot of the fungus activity yet out this year, but you know, the fungus really does well, and the virus with some moisture conditions. So hopefully we can get some rain out there, and then you know, some rain in the next spring would also be really hopeful for these. So there's a few kind of treatments that you hear us talk about. The first is for the average homeowner just looking to protect some trees in their yard, or street trees, something like that, on a very limited basis. Early in the season, we recommend the sticky band approach. You can make your own homemade sticky bands if you want. We have information on our website about doing that. But you can see in the picture here, the gypsy moth move up and down the tree during the day. And so with the sticky band, you can see on this picture, they're all below the sticky band. None are making it above. If you apply it really well, I think you can get some really good results with that. And then later in the season, you can do the burlap technique that is shown here in the top right, where you tie that string around and then fold it over. The caterpillars, when they're looking for a place to pupate, they'll crawl up in there, and then you can clean them out and continue reusing that. Then later in the season, when the egg masses become really obvious, you can go around and scrape egg masses. And you'll see this picture in here. I believe this is on the inside of a boat, which brings up a good point that gypsy moth will lay its egg masses just about anywhere, not just on trees. And they will lay them on boats and trailers and equipment that sits outside. And that is, you know, a way that you can move them around a bit. But those are good places to look to scrape off egg masses. If you have larger properties, aerial application is really going to be the way to go. This is the way, you know, the sugar bushes are dealing with it. This is the way that, you know, large forested landowners deal with it. And most folks are spraying BT, the bacteria that's available, or there's also Gypcheck that can be sprayed, which is the virus. How can you predict defoliation in your area? So I took this right off of our website. We have a training linked to on there and a sampling protocol. We really encourage everyone, before you decide on some sort of treatment, that you go out and do an egg mass survey so that you can quantify the number of egg masses you have. And then we also have a lot of information on on what your management goals may be, and how that fits in with spraying or doesn't fit in with spraying. And that can be accessed at our website, which you see there at the bottom, or the easiest thing to do is just Google NYSDEC gypsy moth. So that's all I had to share right now. I think Gary is up next, unless Jerry's popping in.
Great, Rob. Thanks. Thanks a lot for that. Hopefully, I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but maybe there will be by the time we're done here. So now we're going to move to, as Rob Cole suggested, Gary Copeland, who is a long seasoned forester in the Finger Lakes area of New York State. And he's our most experienced forester with gypsy moth right now, because he's had it 2 years in a row. Of course, Rob did see it way back in the very beginning. But so Gary, please tell us about your experiences in Finger Lakes.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, as Jerry mentioned, I'm definitely not, well, he didn't say this, but I'm definitely not a gypsy moth expert, but we've definitely been brought into it quickly and trying to deal with it the best we can. I'm a private lands forester here in Avon, New York, out in the Western Finger Lakes, Western New York area. And I work with landowners of various sizes and municipalities doing urban forestry. And we've had calls from just about every type of landowner you can imagine. And it kind of started in 2019. We saw scattered incidents of, you know, one tree here, one tree there, random calls throughout the course of the summer. Then throughout that fall and winter, we started seeing signs of large numbers of egg masses like I had never seen before. And it started to get us a little worried. We started talking back and forth and learning as much as we could, reaching out to our Forest Health staff there in Albany, Jerry, Rob Cole, and everybody, and we started that conversation going. We just didn't suspect what we had coming in 2020, especially in like the towns of Bristol, South Bristol, Canandaigua, and Naples. If you're not too familiar with that area, that's basically just west of Canandaigua Lake, and that was unbelievable. My colleague and my coworker Bryce June serves that area, so I didn't see it as directly as he did. But the large contiguous oak forest there really displayed just how bad that was. In the areas that I'm working, a little further to the north and to the west, the forest is a little bit more fragmented and a little bit more northern hardwoods and soft maple swamps. So it was scattered a lot more, but I was still seeing it pretty severe in a lot of locations. And we knew we had a big problem on our hands. And by that fall, so going into the end of 2020 into 2021, we realized it was probably going to be worse, just by the amount of egg masses and the different locations that those egg masses were starting to show up. So we saw it in a wider area than we had seen the previous year, and in many cases more of them as far as egg masses per acre and such. So this season has not disappointed in the sense of just how bad it was going to be. It has kind of showed up as the egg masses have kind of led us to believe it would. It's very intense in a lot of areas. The areas that I work, it's very scattered. As far as the areas that Bryce is working, there's definitely some of those areas that are very long and contiguous. The same towns that got hit very hard last year are also getting hit this year, and some of that has extended to other towns nearby. And I saw some of the same myself. Basically some shifting, but it's still hitting some of the towns that it hit very hard again from last year to this year. So into the presentation here, what is so extremely harmful about the gypsy moths? And it's really not the gypsy moths that will kill the tree, but they can weaken it by defoliating the tree, not giving it a chance to photosynthesize. And I think even more importantly, maybe, is if it does get defoliated to 50 to 60%, the tree is going to drop its leaves, going to do an early abscission, drop the leaves as if it were fall, and then refoliate. And that takes just a lot of stored energy to accomplish that. So that's stored energy that the tree is not going to be able to utilize for other functioning. And possibly more important than that is not be able to use that energy if some other attack comes on, whether it's a severe drought, other insect attacks, diseases, and then the following spring, of course. And if we have gypsy moth around or another defoliating insect, that's going to be very hard on the tree once those storages are depleted. So managing gypsy moth, this is kind of a general side, both for urban forests, for forests, and also yard trees in the suburbs. You want to start that in late summer through winter. Once the leaves are up, it's going to be a lot easier. I'll try not to cover too much of what Rob went into, but I just want to go through this slide as I can here. You kind of want to determine the susceptibility of your site. A lot of that is, what's your species composition? Do you have the species in high numbers that are favorites of gypsy moth? Vulnerability is more about like the actual sites. Are they dry sites, thin soils? Are they sites that are prone to die off, mortality decline after other insect infestations or diseases in past years? And I highly recommend consulting with a professional early and often if you can. What we saw out here, I would imagine you're going to see in your areas as well. And probably one of the most shocking, and I think probably the best thing I could probably share, is that we ran out of arborist support early. And by that, I mean, the arborists were just so overwhelmed that it became pretty difficult last year for arborists to keep up with potential clients. And it's even harder this year. So, as you can imagine, most of our arborists are pretty busy as it is to begin with. And then you bring on a pretty extreme infestation of gypsy moth to an outbreak level here, and they just weighed down quickly. So some people simply didn't get treatment because they couldn't get through or get a hold or get high enough in the line for weight. And that's with arborists. The story is a little bit more complicated if it comes to aerial applicators, but the same general principle and concept. Talk early and often, get that conversation started. You don't necessarily have to commit, and I wouldn't commit to anything until you've assessed your trees and your woods, but start that conversation and don't wait too long. It seems like you got a long time before next year if you're getting ready to prepare for that, but it will go quick, and you don't want to miss out on a good opportunity to get a treatment if you wish to get a treatment. All right. So Rob talked about surveying your forest, and egg mass surveys, they're a little bit tedious. They're not real easy, but they're not real hard either. And if you have forested property or you're managing forested acres, I would highly recommend trying to do some as much as possible, or finding a method that if that's not feasible to do across your entire acres, finding something else that might be at least beneficial in the regards of assessing those trees. And that's something to talk more about with Rob Cole or Jerry Carlson to discuss. We definitely have a lot of people in Albany that can help with this, so reach out when you're not quite sure. But these are some general guidelines and principles. Once you start having about 500 egg masses to the acre, it becomes noticeable. That's probably about I'm told about 30% defoliation is when trees become noticeable. The defoliation becomes noticeable. Once you get to about over 700 per acre, or about 40% defoliated, the tree's going to start suffering in the sense that its growth is going to be slowed down, its productivity is going to be slowed down. So your timber production is going to be slowed down at that point. When you get somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 to 1,200 per acre, then you're looking at a more significant defoliation event to the point where the leaves may drop. They may drop the leaves entirely and put on new crowns and a new canopy. And then that's where you get into that tree vulnerability point for other later problems. Other considerations to use aside from surveying for egg masses is site quality, like I mentioned earlier. South-facing slopes, thin soils are going to be, those sites that struggle for moisture already are probably going to be the most prone to problems. Species composition, those forests on those hillsides are often oak, south-facing hillsides like that. But oak seems to be an extremely important component, especially if you're having more than 40 or 50% oak species in your composition. Recent history, so kind of understanding defoliation that's happened in years past, drought over the past couple of years, other infestations or diseases that you know about. And then something that I've learned a little bit about is the ballooning effect from neighboring areas. And I'm not talking about like the forest down the road. I'm talking about considerable distance, perhaps a mile or more. I'm not quite sure on how far these insects can balloon, but when they're in the early instars of their life, when they're hanging by the threads, descending trees, they could actually snap off. And depending on how the winds are blowing, when a lot of that is occurring, is going to direct where those insects could potentially balloon to. I don't know if that occurs in every infestation year to the degree I've seen in a couple of locations, but one in particular, a town of Ogden. I was this gentleman here in this picture I was working with this winter, and he's a great example. The town of Ogden, by the looks of it, at least on this gentleman's forest, we couldn't find any egg masses from the previous season. As we were surveying, we found only new egg masses, yet we found 6,200 to the acre on average by an estimate that we came up with from our survey plots. And 6,200 is way, way, way over the 1,200 threshold where you start thinking about possibly doing pesticide application from above. So what the heck happened? The only explanation that I could figure in my mind is that we had a lot of ballooning caterpillars coming in from the northwest from a couple of the towns adjacent to Ogden, up in like the Clarkson area, going almost into Orleans County. There was some serious infestations and defoliations in that direction the previous year. Ogden then had a large development of egg masses the following fall, or I'm sorry, the following late summer fall. So that is something that is, I don't know if you could count on it happening or not, but it is just something to be aware about. It can possibly happen. So the egg masses aren't the whole story, is basically just what I want to tell you. It is possible some of these other effects could throw off the numbers a little bit. Pesticide applications, Rob talked to you a little bit about that. There are some silvicultural practices out there recommended by the U.S. Forest Service. They seem to apply better when the cycle of gypsy moths are known a little bit better, so timings of harvest can be worked around. It talks a little bit about, like this particular reference that I put up here on the screen, talks a little bit about salvage harvest, pre-salvage harvest. They're relatively limited and really kind of circumstantial in a sense. So the real approach when it comes to managing forests and treatment is probably going to be the application from use of BT by aerial applicator with a plane or helicopter. But what if the surveys, suggest that you're going to get hit hard and you're going to get defoliated by the numbers? All things are pointing that direction. You still have to take other things into consideration. Of course, the obvious one is if you're the landowner that would have to be responsible for doing the treatment, of course, cost. Is it cost prohibitive? Do you want to break the bank on doing this kind of treatment? The other thing is that we take serious thought and consideration to is the natural controls that are out there. Like Rob mentioned, some of the parasitoids that are building up, some of the diseases that are building up in the population that will eventually naturally crush the outbreak. It's just a question of, do you want to wait for that to occur, or do you want to take some preemptive steps and try to stop extreme defoliation on your property? There's some tough questions, and there's not exactly a perfect answer. It's really going to be a case-by-case scenario and the objective of the landowner. Getting into yards and urban environments, a lot of the same scenarios apply. There's not as much of a good number system for when you're talking about trees per acre. That gets a little bit fuzzy. There are some recommendations out there when you're working in an urban environment, but of course, you could get into situations where you just have 2 or 3 trees per property, and then you start looking at individual trees and making an assessment that's more of a judgment call. And the best thing to do is to consult with an arborist, in my opinion. Double check, get multiple bids or quotes if you can, and get multiple opinions. Talk to your local foresters, whether they're DEC foresters like myself, or maybe city forester. That's real important. How do you find an arborist? This is a great website here, ISA. If you go to treesaregood.org, and once you get on that webpage, there is a link. Find a professional, which is finding a certified arborist. You put in your location and put in the distance of search, and they'll bring up certified arborists. Not every one of them is necessarily experienced with gypsy moth, and not all of them are certified applicators in New York State, but a lot of them are, and it's a great resource to use. What can you use? This has been a great question, and something that I think is pretty relatively new. I think should be brought up is the injection system used for gypsy moths in the year of during the period of egg hatch and actual attack by the gypsy moths. I had previously always thought that if you're doing an injection treatment, you're getting a chemical to the leaves, and then whatever the defoliating insect is feeding on those leaves will take in the chemical and die. But I always thought you really needed a full canopy to pull up by transpiration that chemical to get that effect. What I'm finding out is with a mix of formulations or some changes there, and the use of pressurized injection systems, these arborists are able to get the chemical up into the tree fast enough that they can get it working, or at least into the leaf, so that it'll start working once the insect bites on the leaf within 24 to 48 hours. They could include a treatment that's going to kill right away, and they could also include some chemicals or some pesticides that are going to last and persist. And not only could this be done in the springtime around the time of hatch or shortly thereafter, but it could also be done in the late summer, early fall, the previous year. So like coming up into this coming late summer, fall, that could be a consideration. It could be a really important step if arborists are already under strong demand and they're already spread thin. So it's something to consider if you suspect you're going to have a defoliation again next year, especially for your yard trees I'm talking about now. That give that some thought, maybe contact an arborist even earlier, because fall injections or late summer injections may be possible to help your trees next year. There's some good information on insecticides that are used for gypsy moth on this webpage here. Just keep in mind that this is the sites from Purdue, and some things may be a little bit different here in New York State, given our pesticide laws. Some tactics for the homeowner to try themselves that work to a certain degree. Rob talked about it a little bit, so I'll kind of skip on through here. Actually, going back real quick, sticky bands we find are working very effectively when they're placed correctly. And even rolling tape around the tree backwards, like a couple laps of duct tape, first sticky side in and then flipped over to sticky side out. We're finding that the gypsy moths don't really want to cross that. Even, I don't know if that's going to hold up for the entire season, but so far I've had it working on some trees already. The other thing I'd like to say is get that on immediately after egg hatch. I had some sort of misconception thinking that you wanted to get those sticky band traps out there, later when the gypsy moths were in their final larval stages and coming down the trees during the very early morning. But as we were working out in the field and going to different properties, we noticed that gypsy moth caterpillars were coming down at different times during the day. One thing I did notice, and I don't know if it's a good correlation or not, but windy, cold days, they seem to be down on the ground. There was one day in particular, I went to a private landowner's home, and as we were out there, it was about 2 p.m. and we were starting to notice caterpillars coming up the tree and coming up by the dozens, and it was 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So I was learning this a little bit too late in the season. I would recommend, if you're going to try sticky traps, get them on early, right after egg hatch, because the caterpillars do crawl up and down the trunk of the tree at all times of the year for different reasons.
Yeah, sorry, Gary, but we're out of time.
Okay, sorry, Jerry.
We got to give Jeff a chance to talk about aerial treatments here. So
I apologize. I'll stop the share here.
all right, I think that was really good, but I didn't get a chance to talk much with Jeff Duflo before he came on, but Duflo spray chemical has been around since the Second War, I think, or shortly after that, when his dad started it, and a lot of international innovation has happened as a result of their aerial technology applications. So Jeff, please tell us what we can expect. Oh, Jeff, you're muted.
Hey, how is this working? Are we working now?
Yeah, I can hear you now, but you have to speak up a little bit.
Okay, all right. Anyway, thank you very much for having me on tonight. This is a little bit of a learning curve, all this Zoom stuff, So, back when I was in college, we had slide rules at ESF, not calculators. So I'm doing pretty good. So anyway, I'm not going to talk about I was asked to talk about the when, the why, and the how. What I've done is I paraphrased this into when and why, and then into when and how. Okay. So what we're talking about now is a situation which I talked to Kim Adams today from ESF as well. And we obviously have an increase in the population within New York State, the various areas. And I'd like to thank the contributors for doing a really nice job with the slides, because a lot of that was actually new to me this year. We, prior to maybe April, we really hadn't had a lot of information from people talking about gypsy moth in New York State. Usually we get all kinds of calls. Now we're getting all kinds of calls, and they're coming from Warren County, southwestern New York, east of Buffalo, and then in the Thousand Island region as well. So people are noticing the damage that's occurring, and I don't think we need to go into what that looks like. Those slides are exactly what we've seen. A little bit about myself. We've been doing this. I've been doing this personally for 46 years. And I worked in Wisconsin, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and obviously New York, and a lot of state programs as well as private programs. So I have a lot of experience with various products, and I have to say that we have some of the best products today that we've ever had in the history of the world, to be very honest with you. And someone asked me a few years ago what the difference in our business is, and I said, well, when my dad started, it was DDT and methoxychloroquine and some of the harder chemicals. When I looked up 1925 last night for gypsy moth, I found Paris green and lead arsenic. Okay. Now we live in an area where we're using hormones, insect growth regulators, obviously, and bacteriums. We never had these products back then. And we live in a great time at a great spot in the world. We have products that are very safe in the environment, very specific, work very well, surprisingly, because they're very soft products. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Now, what I'm hearing from people is that, you know, when you go outside and these things are all over your house and all over your porch, and a fellow yesterday said to me, I have to blow my porch off literally twice a day with a leaf blower. That's how much leaf litter is on his porch. That's when people see the problem. But if you're in the business of maple sugar business, like in Vermont, we sprayed for some very large sugar bushes up there. These are multi-million-dollar businesses. And at the end of the day, when they lose their trees, they lose their business, they lose their livelihood, their investment, and it's not a positive thing. And so essentially what's happening is we want the natural controls to come in. And we're at a point right now when the natural controls have become outnumbered, if you will. They've actually been defeated by the gypsy moth. And for what reason? God only knows. I've asked a number of foresters about this, and some say the dry springs, the hot weather, the lack of the fungus, the lack of moisture. Garrett mentioned that. He's exactly spot on with the parasitoids. That's another question for another day. We have to deal with where we are right now. And when I'm looking at it, I love the egg mass count information. That was great. What I want to talk about is what we're going to jump right to, essentially what we do and why. By the way, I love the questions some of the folks are bringing up. Some of those, I know the foresters arborists will answer. But so you have a problem, now what do you do? And you know, what you're really doing here with aerial application or with any of these other things are basically protecting the foliage that you have. You're removing some of the stressors off the tree. And I might add that a lot of people, and as arborists will tell you, there's a lot of stress on trees today from many different kinds of things, not to mention people running around the base, cows. I've seen animals and pastures made in forest already. You name it, it's happened out there. So what we have is a situation where timing is a very, very important part of a good operation involving aerial application. And I can't emphasize this too much. We have a saying in the business, a good approach makes a good landing. And in the forest tent caterpillar business and in the gypsy moth business, it's no different, none whatsoever. So what you need to do is obviously have a forester or an arborist, if you're a landowner, see what's out there, get a feeling for what your population is doing. Is it in decline? Is it actually increasing in numbers? What do your egg masses look like? Are they healthy? Okay. You know, and when we're talking the numbers of 400 and 500 or more per acre, and they're healthy, and the larvae were healthy prior to pupating, chances are you're probably going to have gypsy moths the following year. Now, the issue with timing is this. We're not using chemical insecticides much anymore. We're using things called BTK, all right, which is a biological, and it has to be made. I hate to use the beer analogy, but it has to be fermented in vats. It's actually made in Osage, Iowa. And that process starts in the wintertime, okay? And there's only so much product available. This year in Pennsylvania, over 240,000 acres were sprayed. I don't have the numbers in front of me for Canada, But here in the United States, there was quite a few thousand acres sprayed as well, especially west of us, and fair amount sprayed in the central New York area around Canandaigua, as I think Garrett mentioned. So there's only so much of this product available. They just can't make it and have it there. So when people called me a couple of weeks ago and said, we'd like to spray, I said, well, first of all, you're late. And second of all, there is no more product. It's gone. So if you think you're going to have a problem, please get a hold of whatever applicator you wish to use and figure out what has to be done so they have some idea of how much product to have on hand. Because without the product, none of this happens. And BTK is a great product, works extremely, extremely well. So when you're planning this work, what we have to do is, I can't tell from the outhouse out behind the camp exactly where your property is, which I've had people say to me. So what we need is we need a digital GPS type map, a shape file, if you will. And if anybody's got a pen out there, you can go to your county planner. We use GPS in the airplanes today across the board and have since about 1996, when most counties didn't even have their properties digitized yet. So now all that stuff is pretty well done at a county level. It's very, very accurate. That's how we found out that the courthouse in Lowville was on part of the school property, for instance. That created a problem, but the days of chains and feet and yards and all that are kind of gone, and the digital satellite program is very, very accurate, mostly within a couple feet, by the way. So what we use is, we use a shape file. We use WGS 84, which is what they call an ellipsoid, which is like taking a paper towel here, picking it up in the air, and this is a mountain range, and then we laying it flat on the ground. And what the ellipsoid does is it takes Google Earth and Google Maps, and it figures out how many acres is in that mountain. Where years ago, they would just look at a mountain on a map, topographical map, and measure around it and think that's how many acres was there. So this has been very informative. It's actually very accurate as well. And what we end up with, if you fellas, the foresters out there, what we're looking for is what they call a .kmz or a .kml file, and which is read by Google Earth. And with that, we can email that to the applicator. They can convert that to what we call an N01 file for our aircraft, and we can actually pull that right up. So I've had instances in the past where I was in Buffalo, New York, and I was flying to Binghamton, New York to spray. And the controller said to me, how are you navigating? And I said, well, GPS. And we actually had the block that we were going to spray in Binghamton as we were leaving Niagara Falls already loaded into the airplane. So and we're actually tracking to that block. And that's one of the ways that we save time when we're doing this type of work. So the timing is important. Now, when it comes to the actual application, we did a lot of work in Vermont on forest ant caterpillar just a few years ago, and in New York. Bottom line here is the smaller they are, the easier they are to kill. And it makes sense. It's the same thing with weeds outside your house and so on. The second part of that is less product you need to have. And BTK is measured in BIUs. It's called billions of international units. And say, for instance, the product 4A48B, what that means is 48 billion international units or BIUs per gallon of product. All right. So when we talk about a population, a very, very high population usually incorporates, and maybe Garrett, you could expand on this, but normally a good leaf protection program uses 2 applications of 24 BIUs for an increasing population or a high population existing. If we're a little bit less than that, maybe in the 500 range, we may get away with a larger 30 to 36 BIU application, a single application. All right. And when do you do this? You do this when the eggs hatch. You do this when the larvae are out there and they're starting to feed. You do this when the leaf development is 3/4 or fully developed. And the big bottom line in this thing is, without a lot of mystery, is the larvae have to be eating the leaf. We apply the product in about 100 micron droplets, say 2 quarts, 3 quarts, whatever. And then what happens is it sifts into the canopy. done in the early morning, normally when you have what you call a negative lapse rate, and you have cooler air on the bottom, warmer air above, so the product will settle down, if you will, laying on the leaves, and you want somewhere between 2.5 and 20 drops per square centimeter. So the smaller the droplet that you can put down, and the temperature and the humidity is extremely important here. Like say, for instance, 75 degrees and 50% relative humidity would be a threshold for not to spray, because after that, the material is going to dry in the air prior to landing on the leaf. So we have a graph for that. We look at that, we're actually monitoring that by the hour when we're flying. And at that point in time, the material starts to dry on the leaf. And when that happens, the gypsy moth comes along and it's munching along. And the one fellow you mentioned that a square foot per larvae a day is correct. And I would like to add to that and say that the later instars of the larvae, the 5th and 6th instar specifically, they will eat in one day what the first 4 instars ate the entire time that the larvae were developing. So what they did in that first 30 days or so, the last 10 days, they will eat that much more, all in those 10 days. So you're going to see even more defoliation faster until these things get into obviously start to pupate and slow down. So, or they run out of food, which we've had people call me up and say, Jeff, they're eating the grass in the field here. What are we going to do? So, and I have actually in all these years never had that one before. So they're hungry, and that's all their job is in life, is basically to eat, reproduce, and hang around until next year with new population again. Now, just a little bit on the BTK, being it's a biological insecticide, it's very specific to the gypsy moth larvae or to the caterpillars. And the reason it is it's made up of spores and crystals, and it's ingested. One drop they figure is the silver bullet, okay? And I can honestly tell you that a 100 micron drop has about 24,000 BIUs. So it's not, you got a pretty good 2,400 rather, a pretty good amount of BIUs per drop. Literally hundreds and hundreds of these spores and these endotoxins, of which there's 4 that actually attack the midgut of the larvae, and it dissolves the midgut. So it's a lot like going out and getting food poisoning, which isn't a lot of fun. I've had that experience. And what happens is that the midgut dissolves, the spores and the rest of it cause a sepsis inside the midgut of the larvae, and the larvae stops feeding literally within minutes of ingesting one of these endotoxins. And at the end of the day, about a day or two later, they fall off the tree. So the pH level being alkaline or basic of the larvae is why it doesn't affect birds and things like this that may feed on the larvae and so on. It's not activated by the chemical pH of the midgut of those particular insects. So we're using a BTK now that's been labeled as organic. They've had over 10 years of human studies, all kinds of things that went on with that. It was very, very popular in Vermont and in New York. It worked extremely well. We don't want to, it will take about an inch of rain after it's dry and still be fairly toxic depending on the amount of BIUs that was applied. So at the end of the day, that's what we're working with. And if you're interested in, if you think you're going to be needing treatments, you need to get in contact with the applicator. They need to get in contact, obviously, with the producers. And then the mapping gets done. And if the larger the area you do, obviously around, it's hard to do, like for instance, one house and think that the larvae from the other places adjacent to your house isn't going to move back in on your property. So lake associations, golf courses, Girl Scout, Boy Scout camps, villages. I know Katie'ville up there has been infested. This is the kind of work that we do. And I might mention that we're flying twin engine airplanes. That one slide, by the way, had us spraying for mosquitoes. But in any event, we're allowed to fly multi-engine airplane over congested areas, which is your villages and your towns and those types of things. So at the end of the day, if you have a village or a town, there is an additional requirement with the FAA that we have to basically file what's called a congested area plan, which talks about towers and obstructions to flight, emergency situations, public notification requirements under FAA Part 137, which is what regulates the work that we do. And everybody is regulated federally with that. So with that, I'm just trying to see if I missed anything here. We don't really need to get into a lot of the biology of the gypsy moth. I think that was done very, very well by your other participants. And at the end of the day, hey, we're not part of the problem. I tell people we're part of the solution. And when you have high valued woods, you have areas around the lake that you're trying to protect the foliage. You have trees that are already under stress. You have older trees, which, by the way, arborists will tell you probably to fertilize those trees, make those trees as healthy, feed them as well as you possibly can, and keep their vigor up if possible. I mean, trees can't run away. So here's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a critter of basically forest caterpillar, a gypsy moth, and the tree can't go. So what's going to happen? And so we have these natural controls. They'll help in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. That was great. Sorry, but I think we've got a bunch of questions. And Peter, do you want to raise the questions? Or oh, I'm sorry, Christy. We've got Christy going to talk. That's terrible of me, Christy. Christy is your regional senior forester here in the northern Adirondacks and St. Lawrence Valley area, and she's had a lot of interaction with private foresters, and she'll probably give you her phone number too. And excellent resource. Christy. You're muted, Christy. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. I will be very brief so we can get to the questions that everybody has. But now that you've heard from my expert colleagues from around the state, I wanted to touch base quickly on my role at the local level. I am the private lands forester serving Clinton, Essex, and Franklin counties. My primary focus is administration of the forest tax law program and management of the state's interest in several conservation easements. So with about 500,000 acres under my belt, I also dabble in working with Forest Health to communicate issues arising at the local level. I've been out and around on the roads in eastern Clinton and Essex counties. I've put eyes on the extent of the defoliation. Today I was in Beekmantown, Shazy, Ausable, Morrisonville, among many other places. I dragged my 7-year-old son around the car for about 3 hours, getting a closer look at things. Jerry mentioned that we're going to be doing forest health flights that we do every year. We're in the process right now of conducting those. We've requested the flights over Clinton and Warren counties get moved up so we can do them earlier in the summer. I should be on the flight for the northern part of Clinton and part of northern, or all of Clinton County, northern part of Franklin County as well, and into Essex County and a touch into Hamilton County. So once I have an opportunity to do that, I will have better eyes on things from the air, the extent of the damage in the county. And that is all I really wanted to let you know. So we can go on to questions now.
Great. Thanks, Christy. Apologize again for making bumping
Well,
you
it was
there.
a short segment, so.
Let's see. I wasn't paying attention to the questions, but what do we got here? I go up. I think most of these have been answered. So one question, how do you stop them from coming in the house? We keep finding them inside. I know the tree in front of the house is full of them. Rob, I think you more or less covered that, no?
I think Rob had to leave the presentation, or no? Oh, he's still here.
I'm back.
Yeah, well, okay. So now he's going to do it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, like I said, the only thing we've been hearing from a lot of people is just rinsing them off with the hose. I have heard that there are some companies out there treating houses, but I'm not sure what chemicals they're using. But you might find someone that would treat your house or your deck for you with some product that is registered in New York State.
Right. You want to tackle, should the diseased tree be cut down?
Well, like we talked about, if this is the first year defoliation, there's a good chance it'll put out a new flush of leaves this year. And even if it doesn't, I would recommend waiting and seeing what it does next year, because they don't all reflush, but it could put out new leaves next year. So wait until after next spring, and if it doesn't put out leaves, then yeah, it's done and should be removed.
Christy, do you want to add anything to that since you got the local knowledge here?
No, I think Rob's spot on.
Okay, excellent. From Matt to all panelists, I've seen some wasps, tiny. I'm wondering about their life cycle. I've studied the natural enemies perhaps more than everyone here, but so there are several wasps that are parasites and parasitoids, and there are also some flies, several species of bird, mostly cuckoos, and that will eat the larvae as well. So there are a lot of natural enemies out there. Some of them have been introduced successfully and some of them not so successfully. They do play a role in keeping the population low in non-outbreak situations. So their life cycles of the parasites and the parasitoids are highly synchronous with the gypsy moth life cycle, but as I mentioned, they do play a large role in keeping the populations down. So here's another question. What can the state do to help minimize the damage next year? Putting bans around trees in the woods is unmanageable. When was the last time New York State sprayed Clinton County? Excuse me, who funds it? State, country, town? Rob, I think you're probably got the most information on that question.
Well, historically, the state has not had an annual treatment program since the late 70s. And then from there on out into the early 80s, it was done through the counties and funded by the state. And since then, any spraying that has been done, I have heard that, you know, from folks that it was done at the county level at one time, and that would have been the county, and I'm not sure how they did that. And more recently, some, you know, like state parks will treat occasionally, but yeah, DEC does not, again, because of the cyclical nature and those natural enemies, you know, that's just where it's at right now.
I wonder if Jeff might have a experience with any local towns or counties engaging his services.
Well, that's a very good question. And what we've seen in the past is we've had numerous villages treat where the entire village obviously was inundated with the gypsy moth, as well as the forest ant caterpillars. But what Bob said is pretty much spot on. The way the states seem to get involved in this, even in Rhode Island, Vermont specifically, is the forestry end of it. They basically assist the landowner, cooperative extension gets involved. They have I'm not trying to find the right word for this, but basically they have the skills to help and assist the landowner in making decisions and helping them, for instance, with mapping. If they end up wanting to do something, they can steer them to your county planner, for instance. But as far as the biology and what's really going on, the states generally assist at that level. And I've worked with many state foresters. They do a tremendous job. And it helps the landowner to make a conscientious, proper decision if it's worth spending the money to do this or not, and all the rest of it that's involved. So that's all good information that Bob mentioned. It's very accurate.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Can horticultural oil be used on egg masses? Rob, you want to tackle that?
Yes, it can. It's not a super common treatment, but you can do that. I mean, again, we recommend the scraping into like warm soapy water, but that would be another way to go about it.
Right. Jeff, you know anything about that oil? Use the oil?
No, I don't. I do know that there are some BVA 13, for instance, is what they call a dormant spray oil. It does have an EPA label for it, and it's used for mites on, say, cotton plants and things like this. This may work. I don't know if part of its application on the label is okay for eggs treating with the gypsy moth. But I understand what Bob said is extremely accurate. It's not a very common treatment. Most people physically go out there and remove the egg masses. I can tell you this: don't use a torch. We've had some guy burn his home down using a torch on some of his egg masses and caught things on fire. So that would not be a good idea. But physically go out there and then remove them if you want. I suppose some kind of a safe dormant type oil could possibly be used. I just don't really know much about that. No torch.
Another great response. Thanks, Jeff. I see Rita Leal asked us that all the trees around her home is totally defoliated. Those trees, if they're unless they're conifers, they'll survive, Rita, the next year. The thing is that the egg mass density will tell you some story about what you can expect next year. Otherwise, the forest there will be alive, and you'll probably see it refoliate this fall or later this summer. And you asked how to find an arborist, and both Gary and Rob had the website for the ISA, the International Society of Arborists, and I hope you copied that down. The moths have completely eaten the needles off my blue spruce and tamarack trees. Did I hear you correctly that those trees may perish? Rob, that would be your.
Yes. Actually, Jerry and I just had a conversation about this earlier this week. And most conifers don't have the ability, like I said, to refoliate. They form the new buds during the growing season. So if they're defoliated before they can put those buds on, then they won't be able to put out new needles.
Yeah, and Mr. Porter says, what about drought conditions? Is this not an issue? Well, I think all speakers, Jeff and Rob and Gary, all said drought conditions are an extra roll of the dice in the equation. If you have bad drought, you're going to have less probability of survival of the impacted tree, no matter what kind of tree it is, right, guys? Yeah, they're shaking.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yep.
How do you tell if they're gonna hit their property before they're actually here? Well, I thought Gary Capel did a good story on that, where these things, when they're larvae, they can get blown around in the wind, and also when they're adults. Although the females don't fly, it seems that they can be blown, and the larvae obviously can travel several miles just by leaving a silk parachute, if you will. And when they're really small, they can be blown, like I said, miles. Anything to add to that, guys? Do egg masses of other moths look the same? Well, they're pretty peculiar, the gypsy moth egg masses. I always say that they look like chewing gum with hair and it's stuck to the tree. It's kind of true. The other thing is other moths are never in that kind of vast number. When you have gypsy moths in your forest, you have literally several inches altogether of a bunch of egg masses under the branches of large trees and oak trees and those kinds of things. Rob, do you have anything to add to that? No? Or Jeff?
No, not at all. The previous question, though, I did have a thought about if you're someplace at a state park or somewheres and your car is inundated with gypsy moth larvae, don't take them home with you, okay? And because that's a lot of how this stuff gets spread around. I mean, the larvae do swing on do the Tarzan thing and all that with the thread, but when you got them on the vehicle and they're all over and then you go 15 miles away, guess what's just happened, okay? So.
Oh, excellent comment, Jeff. Do your aircraft ever move them around?
No, we haven't had that problem with the aircraft. We've had just about every other problem, so.
Yeah. Well, I know Rob Cole has done some drone surveys of transport trucks going back and forth across the borders, and we're pretty sure we get gypsy moth from Pennsylvania when they're in outbreak.
There you go.
We have some 20 pine trees surrounding our house. Are they in danger of falling? Rob, you'd be the answer to that.
Well, if they are dead, white pine are not known to be the strongest of trees out there. So not having seen them, I don't want to comment on if they're in danger of falling or not. But again, if they're severely stressed or dead after the gypsy moth outbreak, I would suggest, like Gary said, finding a tree care business and an arborist and getting them looked at.
Yeah, keep your mic live, because the next one is an arborist question. If there's no arborists in northern New York with commercial pesticide app license, no pesticide applicators in Clinton County, who can treat my home or only homes? Well, who can treat trees, not just homes?
Well, that's a great question. I would find it hard to believe that there aren't any pesticide applicators that can treat in Clinton County. Looks like Christy might have an answer. Yes.
Yeah, I didn't even see your name. Christy, you could answer a lot of these
I
questions.
had to start my video and unmute myself because
Okay.
there are none in Clinton County. I looked into this. I tried to find someone. This is how we ended up with Jeff speaking to us this evening. Is I wanted to try to find someone in Clinton County, and there was nobody.
Wow.
I had a question. This is Pete from the Soil and Water District. So somebody asked a question also about like systemic insect, like over the counter tree spikes or drenches that, are there any labeled for the gypsy moth caterpillars, or is that something that somebody could use?
I think Jeff would have the most information on that.
Well, I don't know, other than to keep your trees healthy. That's all I can tell you. The tree's under enough stress with the gypsy moth and other things that are out there, including the drought, but in the end, like the Job tree spikes, I've read in places where, yeah, these things do help with the vigor of the tree. A little bit of fertilizer if necessary, obviously soil test to see what's needed, but soil compaction is a big problem. And so if you've got a place where people are driving their cars up around on top of the trees because the driveway is too small, that doesn't help the root system. So just some common sense health things with tree care, because you hate to lose that special tree that's out front. And I was talking to Steve Nicholson this morning, by the way, from Biosciences, and he said that, some people don't think this is a real problem, but then all of a sudden they have the oak tree out by the waterfront, or the tree that the family grew up with, and then they look out and they see it with no leaves, and then they say, you know what, this is a problem. And so certain trees mean more to other people, especially when you're a landowner and it's one that you have. And those are things that you have to really do specifically nurture and keep as long as you can, even though we all know they get old at some point in time and go into decline. So keep the tree healthy. It really helps when you're being defoliated and with this stressor.
Christy, did you want to comment on that?
I think there's not much more I could add to that answer.
Okay. I was trying to interpret your your video camera's on, so I was trying to interpret what you were thinking.
No, I figured I'd just leave it on at this point.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Jeff, keep your mic active, because the next one's asking, BTK doesn't hurt birds, but what about the bees and butterflies?
Okay, good question. I'm just looking at the technical manual now from 4A, and it says essentially the natural proteins are toxic to certain insects, but not to human beings. That's good. Birds or other animals, including fish and bees. So the question about other lepidopteran larvae, if you have them present at this particular time and at the particular stage, there's a possibility that you could involve other lepidopteran larvae that's there. However, in talking again with Valent Biosciences about this, it's a very minimum impact at that time of the year. But as far as the specificity of how specific the property, the chemical can be, it's very, very specific in the environment. And with the non-target organisms, keeps them safe. And that's the main thing. Even if a bird were to pick up a larvae that is in the process of dying, which they don't usually do because there's enough live ones out there. The bottom line is that it won't multiply or cause the sepsis inside the animal, inside the bird. Good question though.
Question from Rita. I am in the Adirondack Park. Is there anything being done specifically for that area? Well, we would not be able to treat the forest preserve that would be constitutionally protected. And we annually survey and monitor for all defoliators throughout the park. So that's about all we do. Rob, you want to add anything to that? No, Christy?
I would just say that, the monitoring is part of what we'll be doing when we do the forest health flights that I'll be participating in.
Right. So we will know what's going on in the park, but what decisions get made afterwards is another thing altogether.
Yeah. If I could try to screen share. I have a PDF on my iPad of the flight plan. I could try to put that up so people could get an idea of, the flight patterns.
Go for it. I would say try it. Yeah.
All right, one second here. All right. I'm gonna just close a couple of apps.
This would be Brent's map, right?
Yes. Okay.
Brent Keinel is our geomaticist, and he manages all of the statewide forest health flight paths and mapping. Yep.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I'm used to WebEx and not Zoom. I apologize.
That's okay. I think that we're going to get all of the park covered before
Yes.
the end of the season anyway. So the other question was, how do we contact Christy with questions?
You can get I'm still working from home. You can get a message to me by calling the Natural Resource Office at the Raybrook headquarters, and the number there is 518-897-1291.
All right. And the next question, is there any plan for funding to prevent next year's invasion? Well, Rob will probably be the best to answer that since he's the statewide coordinator.
Yeah, well, we are having some conversations with the Forest Service to see what's available from them and the timing of getting the money. And those conversations haven't happened yet, but they are on the schedule in the coming weeks. So that's about all we have right now for funding.
And Jeff, you mentioned a pretty detailed understanding of the manufacturer of Gypsy. We're told that we need to get them information about the acreages to be treated by the end of November. Is that about right?
I would have to say it is. No, I didn't really refer to Gypsy. I was referring to BTK.
Oh, that's right. It was
Valent
BTK.
Biosciences.
Yeah.
Gypsy, from what I understand, is only been made and is only handled by the U.S. Forest Service at this point in time.
Right. Oh, so you've never actually sprayed Gypsy?
Well, actually, I think we have actually done some work in the Allegheny State Forest in Pennsylvania.
That's right. I have that record that you
Yeah,
did that.
yeah, we did that, and that was kind of a neat thing, applying a virus. And so
That was in 2012, I believe, wasn't it? Or somewhere
Yes.
around that.
that's correct. And the issue with spraying Gypsy is it's actually more money than spraying BTK, number one. Number two is it's increasing the amount of virus that's out there, but in the meantime, you're still going to lose a lot of leaves. Okay. So it's not actually attacking the gypsy moth directly like BTK is, or some of these other systemics that Bob was referring to. So it's a product that's out there. It's another biological product, one of three, by the way, that are currently available. And it's a good product. I just think that in today's world, what the landowner wants to do is protect the foliage if they can, and obviously spend less money if they can.
Great. Can we still report our land area defoliated? How it would, okay, well, as Christy mentioned, we're still in the process of doing our overview aerial flights, and we create the total area impacted as we see it from the air. So from our perspective, we've got that covered. What's going to happen to the acorns, Christy?
Ooh, well, I'm not sure. That would actually have been a perfect question for Garrett. I am still learning about gypsy moth. Perhaps Rob might be able to chime in on that. Sorry.
Yeah, my assumption is there could be a decline. Well, there's two things that could happen. There could be a decline because it's a fruit, and making fruit is not, there may not be enough energy for it right now because it's lost all the leaves. Sugar production happens in the leaves. There's no leaves. How's it going to put out these fruits? So the other thing that could happen is there could be a real stress reaction. The tree feels like it's going into severe decline, and it could put out a lot of acorns. I suspect it will be the first, but those are my two options.
Okay, I'm glad to know. I would have
Sounds
answered.
good. Jeff, is it advisable to do aerial treatment in a populated area? And is there any way to estimate the cost for something, say, like 50 acres?
We do it all the time, and it's highly successful. There's an element of public notification and as well as education that needs to be brought into those types of programs. And what it's essentially doing is preventing individual landowners from going out and doing things that are maybe not approved and using products that are possibly not approved. The techniques that Bob mentioned earlier, those are good techniques. Okay, those are fine things, but we have people that want to go out and do their own thing. And when you get into large areas like villages and some cities even, and people going out and doing their own stuff, you end up with an uninsured huge liability with that. So normally they go for an organized insect control program of some sort. We do it with mosquitoes, and in Wisconsin, and most of the areas around Manitowoc, Sheboygan, and those places, we treated all those places with BTK, and without very, very little issues whatsoever. People were more than happy to have a large area treated when you have a large area problem like gypsy moth.
All right, excellent. Will tapping the maples next spring put the trees under more stress? Well, of course, that depends on whether or not your maples have been defoliated, but Christy, yeah.
I would say if they've been defoliated, that's likely. It could, but tapping the trees is generally pretty safe. It doesn't really stress the tree too much. So I think that they would be okay. If they were completely defoliated, you might want to give them a break, but partial defoliation or no defoliation, I don't think would be a problem.
And the next question, I guess, is for you. What should the local homeowner do to protect their property? And so what do they do when there's no arborist?
I am going to try to start looking into finding out if there's anybody in Burlington that comes over, or some companies in, I know there's some tree care companies in Glens Falls. I believe they have some certified arborists. Just to try to at least have some names for people to see. I don't know if they travel this far, but we have a cooperating forester list. I'd like to try to get a few names out there of people, of arborists in the greater region, to be able to provide people with, I can't endorse anybody, obviously, but we can, I'm trying to get some names together for people. So I just have to broaden the geographic region in which I'm searching.
Perfect. And I guess the next question for Jeff, is there a way to estimate the cost of aerial spraying of BT?
Well, yeah, there is. And it has a lot to do with what the cost of BT is going to be in 2022. We don't know that yet. And it's a good question of, 'cause I figured costs would come up here. And essentially it's hard to believe that I actually got to look at my notes for this, but at the end of the day, essentially what it comes down to is what size of an area the landowner has. We don't technically do less than about 10 acres, because what happens is the untreated areas, if they're inundated with caterpillars, they'll work their way back into that area anyway at some point. So a little bit of a margin there. 10 acres is about as small as a person can do without being reinfested within the time period that the larvae are feeding. And that's an issue. So, but number two is how many, you get a bigger area, more people in that area, like I mentioned, a village or say a golf course or a lake association. You can do a better job aerially applied when you have a larger area, because you have a bigger area that you're treating at the proper time, for one thing. So you're getting more bang for the dollar spent. Now, how far the area is from where we're located in Lowville, New York, and all that. And if there was much work up there, we'd obviously be flying out of probably Plattsburgh at the the old station there. So at the old base. But in any event, faring time, costs, and all that are all the same. If you fly someplace and you do 20 acres, or you fly to the same place and you do 300 acres, those are all cost benefits that we have to factor into it. So we do it on basically a site-by-site basis. And if we have enough work in a particular area, then we'll move into that area with equipment, ground equipment, as well as with aircraft, and then work with the coordinating individuals in that area, and then prioritize areas as well. So those are all things that have to do with costs. So I would say that whatever they charge this year in New York State, that we're probably looking at a similar cost for that. Garrett Copeland in the Finger Lakes, he was involved in that area, so he would probably have some idea of the cost. From my understanding, it was somewhere in the $50 to $55 range an acre, but I'm not sure what the BIU rate was, and if it needs to be that high up in Clinton County. I don't have enough information to really answer that question, but it's a very good question.
There was a couple questions from folks asking for Jeff's contact information, and I did post his website address, which is www.duflospray.com.
Great.
No, that's actually been compromised.
Uh-oh.
I know it happens to nobody else but me, but anyway, it's duflospray@gmail.com. Now,
Okay.
thank you.
That's easy to remember.
Yeah.
And Christy, there's a question here. Will you post the information that you collected about arborists?
I can see if there's a way we can get that posted to the DEC website. I would have to coordinate that through some folks in Albany. But once I get that information together, I happily type something up and I could shoot it off in an email at the very least. But right now I got to start with a name. So it might take me some time, but once I do, I can see if that's something we could post someplace, or at least have available to email to people.
Great. All right. Well, I know that there's been some disappointed people, but we did our best. I thought you guys all did an excellent job. Thank you very much. And Peter, back to you.
All right, well, I'd like to thank all the panelists for participating tonight. I'd like to thank all the, the attendees that listened in. As we learn more information, we'll try to post it on the Soil and Water Facebook and page and website. I'm sure that we won't stop learning about gypsy moths tonight. And I think with that, I think we'll end the recording. And if there's any unanswered questions, folks certainly can email me and I'll try to get answers for you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.